All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Gotham Writers Inside Writing. Today, we're going to be talking about picture books. But first, a couple of announcements. As I've been saying, the Gotham Writers Conference is going to be on Zoom this year, but registration is open for October 16th through 18th. We have our own picture book table there. So if you have a picture book that you want to pitch to two agents that represent picture books, including our guest today, you are welcome to register for that at any point. Also, we have a special query evaluation episode of Inside Writing coming up next week. I'll tell you more about that at the end of the show, as well as more details on the Twitter pitch party at the end of the show as well. About today, remember that at any point in the show, you can ask questions. Some of you are already using the Q&A function to talk about the music choice for today, so thank you for getting involved already. If you have questions relating to picture books for either of our panelists, you can start posing them at any point, and I'll ask some of them at the end of the show also. Anyways, enough of that. Let's talk about picture books. We're going to start with a quote from Tommy DePaulo, who said, "A picture book is a small door to the enormous world of the visual arts, and they're often the first art a young person sees." We're going to talk more about that quote later, but for now, let's meet our guests. First, literary agent at the Stamola Literary Studio, Erica Rand Silverman. Hello, Erica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being
here.
Hi,
everybody.
And then our author guest for today, author of several New York Times bestselling picture books, including the Mindfulness I Am series, Susan Verde. Hello, Susan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you both for being here. So we're going to start the show like we always do with a definition. Susan, other than just being a book with pictures, how would you define a picture book? What audience is it intended for?
Wow. So picture books are, well, I'm repeating something that's been said many times before, but picture books are both mirrors and windows, right? They are a reflection of ourselves, and they are an introduction to another world. And I personally think picture books are for every age. You know, a picture book is being read to a younger child, but it's an adult who picks up the picture book. So picture books have this power to break down these big concepts into very palatable pieces. So that would be how I would define and describe picture books.
Mm-hmm. And Erica, first off, if you have anything to add to that, and then I wanted to ask you what the difference was between picture books, board books, chapter books, these other books for young readers.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is that picture books are an opportunity to read aloud. And that also kind of segues us into your next question, is that picture book experience is that some more so than others are going to be used as a performative act as well as an independent reading experience. So that's an important thing to consider. It's something that agents and editors and librarians and teachers and parents and children themselves are considering when they read a picture book. So if we're going to look down to a board book, that's for a very young child. They're specifically board, they're thick. A baby or young child can chew on them, they can try to rip them, and they cannot succeed. And this is why we create books for little hands to be able to grip and hold and move on their own, to give them agency. And if you've ever seen, a 2-year-old try to navigate a picture book, it's much harder, and they're inevitably going to rip those pages, and off comes the dust jacket. And so board books are a way to engage our youngest children in the reading experience before they're able to actually perhaps sit through an entire narrative, and before they're able to actually physically hold a picture book. And then moving upwards, you have early readers, which so historically publishers and schools sort of worked together to create leveled readers, which were based on a child's reading level. But even beyond those leveled readers that you might find from Harper or Scholastic, there are early readers that are no chapters, but their trim size is usually a little bit longer and thinner. We're starting to segue our children out of these sort of full spreads, lap book experiences into a smaller reading experience so they can begin to feel like they are moving up. The word choice is carefully selected to coincide with what children are learning. And then you start moving into chapter books, which kids are beginning to be able to follow a story from just one moment to many moments that are adding into a plot line up from there. Yeah,
Gotcha.
but the early readers and chapter books are still often heavily illustrated to help with the decoding of the story through the visuals.
Right. Thank you. That was very, very precise with each level. So it's very helpful. Susan, you brought this up about picture books being meant to be read aloud. Do you write with that in mind? Do you write with the parent in mind, or are you targeting it towards the children?
I mean, when I'm writing, I am typically writing without anyone specific obviously I'm writing with the young reader in mind in terms of the language I might choose, or and how advanced I might make some of it, and how familiar I might make some of it. But really, when I'm writing, I am writing based on my theme, my idea, my story. So I will perhaps, in a first draft, if I write my story, and then as I edit, it's during the editing process that I really start to have the reader, both the adult and the child, in mind, and how the conversations might be fostered, how the language, how specific the language is. But as I'm doing my first draft, it's really just the story. And then when I go back, then of course I have those people, those participants in mind, because I do want it ultimately to be interactive, to be something that inspires conversation and connection. So on some level, those things come into play. But initially, it's just the story.
Mm-hmm. And at what point do you ever read it aloud to make sure that it kind of flows nicely?
My favorite thing to do is give it to Erica to read aloud, because she is the best read aloud she really, I'd have her read a grocery list and you'd be like, oh my gosh, read me more.
I love to read aloud.
She should be doing that, in addition. That should be her side hustle. But I do read them aloud. I read them aloud. I have 3 children who are now teenagers, so often they're a little bit over it. But I do share my stories, or I'll read them aloud myself to hear. So yeah, that is definitely part of the creative process, because that will often help me, figure out A, if things are going in the right direction, or B, the language choice. So reading aloud is definitely a part of the whole process, for sure.
And Erica, I feel like I now know the answer to this question already, but what value do you put when you're reading it? Like, do you read the book aloud when you see a query? Do you read it, or do you just read it and
Always.
Okay.
Listen, sometimes you get a query and from the very beginning, it might not be for you. But if I'm really considering something, I read it aloud. I also have 2 young children, one who is 9 and one who is 7. I also believe picture books are for everybody. like some people were geeky fans of Star Wars. I'm a geeky fan of picture books, and so I feel like everybody else should be too. But I will read aloud to my boys a lot. But I read out loud for myself, and I encourage my clients. And it amazes me, because I do have clients who will write a picture book text, and it's wonderful. And they haven't read it aloud. So I like to say, if you're not reading aloud, that's problematic, but it's not true, because some people still can manage to do it very successfully without having gone through that process. But for others, it's integral, and also not even just reading it aloud, but playing with the page turns, having making yourself a dummy, just taking a bunch of paper and stapling it together and just plotting out where the text might go within those pages, and then having that experience of the page turn. This is what's going to really elevate your story when it's being evaluated by editors or agents.
And that's interesting, because I wanted to talk about page turns as well. How much value do you put on an author's ability to know where a page turn comes? Is that something that factors into the evaluation process?
That's something often that an agent might help with. And that's, with Susan, I'm always like, let's paginate. She's like, I'm not she's not a paginator. That's not what Susan does, right? So, we've also been working with her editor for a long time, and like that happens in that editing process. And I have other clients who are. I always encourage it. I mean, we've been working together a long time, and I still encourage it. But it doesn't mean that you're going to do it, and that's fine too. It can happen with the editor. But if you are first breaking in and you're looking to hook people, it's just one way to hook. Maybe your concept is killer, and like that's where the hook is. Maybe your use of language and wordplay and jokes are where your strength is, and that's your hook. Maybe it's the way you've developed a character, and that's your hook. Or maybe it's that you really know how to land your text with those page turns. So it's just one more way to hook your new audience.
I have to say that my very first book, The Museum, I worked with the illustrator Peter Reynolds, and together we did create a dummy, actually on file cards. And, so we did paginate on file cards, and he did make a little sketch, and we did, I did place the text. That was probably the only dummy I've ever really created. Although when I write, I do tend to break things up in sort of stanzas. So that's how I feel it goes page by page. I just don't do the paging, but it's definitely chunked in a way that I think might work.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is what happens at the publishers is different too. So I'll see sometimes an editor, with my illustration clients, sometimes an editor and art director will give one of my artists a text and say, how would you paginate this? Sometimes they will give my artist a text and it's paginated. Sometimes they will give the artist an actual dummy, like a white dummy where they've already inlaid the text. And then my artist sometimes will say, ooh, this will land so much better here. Can we move these lines a little bit? So it's like even that process on the publishing side, once a book has been acquired, is really different depending on who you're working with.
So would you recommend that people make a dummy of their book before querying it?
I do, especially when you're early in your career. I think it's a wonderful exercise. Mm-hmm. It's just one more way for you to interact with your work and see it sort of in a new way. Mm-hmm. So and to tell if it's way too long or way too short, and where does the climax fall, and
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. I want to get into the author-illustrator relationship if it's not the same person. So, Erica, getting this out there, do picture book authors have to bring their own artist to the table? Do they have to be an artist themselves, or can they just provide the text?
Provide the text.
Okay.
So I know that there's a lot of talk around festivals and conferences and writer groups that there's, like the death of the picture book text, and nobody wants just text anymore. And I understand it's an extremely competitive marketplace, but I assure you there are editors and art directors who have a list of artists who they want to work with, and they are combing through piles. They are calling me. They are calling other agents to say, do you have a text that might work for this illustrator? So just for that reason alone, editors and art directors want texts. They have artists they want to work with. They have artists in their arsenal they already work with that they want to keep working who don't write for themselves. That's number one. Number two, that creative process of matching an author with an artist, it's like magic. It's really fun. And editors and art directors love that process. And so they need writers in order to be able to make that process still happen. And I do think unless you found yourself in a creative relationship where you are creating something with somebody, where you are behind the words and they are behind the visual art, and this thing is coming out of the two of you and you cannot stop it. I would never discourage that from happening. But if you have created a text and now you find yourself feeling like you must find an artist in order to get that text acquired, that is not necessarily true. With that said, even myself as an agent, I am finding that I too am looking to package texts with artists before I go to publishers with them. But it is a risk. And I have access to my own arsenal of artists, the artists of the studio. I have access to friends who are agents and their arsenal of artists, where I can pull something together that I think would be appealing to publishers on many levels. You know, it's not just the talent to make the right match, but it's also understanding the ins and outs of how an artist can lift up a new writer, how an established writer can lift up an artist, having a sense of where an artist's art is living in the marketplace in the moment. And as a new writer, you might not have the knowledge of the ins and outs of that, and you might bring somebody on and they might actually weight your story down in the wrong direction, and you might be losing out.
So, Susan, when you're writing your stories, do you have an idea in your head of what you want them to look like? Obviously, you've worked with several authors multiple times, so if you know you're working with them, you can see it happening. But for ones where you don't have an artist already attached, is that something that's going on in your head?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, well, so for example, I've worked with Peter Reynolds, who's the illustrator for the I Am series and some of my other books, and I don't really, I know, I have a sense of how the illustrations might go, even though he always surprises me. I sort of understand the style and understand that he'll understand what I'm saying and how it might be brought to life. But in other cases, yes, as I'm writing, I'm certainly visualizing things. I have images, I wrote Hey Wall, a book about street art and murals on a wall. And I was thinking about street art. I was channeling the street artists that I love and have sort of grown up with. But I also never get stuck on the visuals because I have learned to sort of trust and have faith and kind of give it up to whomever the illustrator ends up being. I mean, I've been incredibly lucky, I guess, that I've had, first of all, wonderful illustrators working on things, but also, it's funny because you may have a sort of vision in your head, but when you get the illustrations back and you see them, not only for me anyway, am I sort of surprised and very emotional and like, oh my gosh, I never would have thought of that, but also they put in these little sweet, amazing details that never would have entered my head. The animal in the background, or the way a room is decorated, or a city street. So it's just I just have learned that I have to allow someone else. I have to make my words intentional enough that somebody else will be inspired to create something incredible.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting because I was comparing two of your books, The Rock and Roll Soul and Hey Wall, two very different artistic styles. Was that something that you intended, or when it came back, it just fit the spirit of the story so well?
I mean, each one of them, Matthew Cordell was the illustrator on Rock and Roll Soul, and John Parra is the illustrator on Hey Wall. And I sort of had no thoughts. I mean, I knew Hey Wall, I wanted a wall. I knew for Rock and Roll Soul, I wanted a kid who loved music. And that was about it. And so I was, I am glad for the difference because they are two very different books. And it's sort of, again, it's that kind of, windows and mirrors things. It's new worlds, other things that you might not see. And I don't want each of my books to be exactly the same because the stories are different. but as far as what they chose and how they expressed the story, I mean, both times I was, I often, when the world allowed, I used to work in Starbucks or a coffee shop, right? I did not sit in my home. And so I cannot tell you how many times I have received the sketches in an email and burst into tears in the middle of Starbucks because I was so happy and moved and surprised and in awe of the art that I was looking at, that came from my story. So it's great that it's so different. It's sort of the way it is. And I'm glad that that's the process.
Mm-hmm. And Erica, do you evaluate the artistry of a book the same that you would the story? Does it have to tell the story the right way?
Do you mean once it's matched up with the art, or?
Yeah, once the art has come back for the story, is there an evaluation process where you decide if that's right, or whose decision does that fall to?
Yeah, I mean, depending on how far along and like when my author clients are in their career, really makes difference by how much consultation or approval they have over both the selection of the artist, over, how the work is being represented. I'm sure you've all heard this before, but just in case not, I think one important point to make is that when you are writing a text, you want to make sure that you're not telling what can be shown. So that's one really easy way to elevate your work. Back to if you play with the dummy exercise, is that if somebody asks, should I actually sketch it out? You shouldn't actually submit your own sketches. But if you do play with that, you'll see if the picture is telling the same exact thing or showing the same exact thing that your text has just told. So an artist is often looking to tell the story, but not, and this is where we get a little different with early readers, where you do want the text and the art to sort of tell the same because the art is specifically there to help the reader decode. But in a picture book, it's to enhance. It's to, if your story could be, if your text could be read aloud exactly as is and doesn't need pictures to extend the story to give the full picture, then you're writing perhaps a poem for a magazine. But your text should need the art in order to come to life. Otherwise, you are telling too much in the text itself. But back to your original question, yes, I do get involved with my clients. Like when, for example, Susan's book that's going on sale this fall, I Am One, a book of action. It's a powerful book. And what Susan approaches issues that are sensitive in her books. And she's sort of unafraid that way. And she often is a trailblazer to approach them before other people have. And so we need to be extremely careful about representation and this mirrors and windows. And because her work is so atmospheric and because they're poems, the visual is grounding it in sort of a narrative. And when it does that, we have to be really sure that that narrative is representative of what Susan wants it to be and thinks it should be, while also giving freedom to Peter to take it in a direction that he feels it should be. And so it's extremely collaborative. And sometimes the text even changes. I always know a good editor when they pay you out on your text has been delivered and accepted, but they say, once the art is in, we might go back in and change some of that text because it's inevitable that is going to happen. And sometimes I'm lucky enough to be a part of that process because I love it. But it's really more about Susan and the artist and the editor and the art director. But I'm another brain, who gets to weigh in.
So you touched on a subject I want to get back to later about about making serious subjects digestible for young readers. But I want to ask one more question about the working with artists. Susan, is there ever back and forth when you see an art for your book? Is there ever a time where you think this doesn't do enough? Do you ever, I mean, when is the point where you say, I need something different here?
Well, I mean, knock on everything. So far, I haven't really had that experience. Although for the most recent book, I Am One, we did need to change some of the art because it wasn't quite going in the same direction. So that actually was thankfully Erica's involvement that kind of caught that.
It was in the middle of, when, I mean, it's still an issue, of course, what's happening down south between us and South America, and politically involved with the wall that was being built. But at the time that book was being not necessarily written, but the time it was being illustrated, this was very much on all of our minds. And that wasn't the sole purpose behind I Am One when Susan wrote it, but what's happening in a moment kind of can shift, how you're looking at a project. And of course, how we look at I Am One now at a time when we all have to take our responsibility to wear a mask or to make safe choices to affect our entire communities. We are just one person who can affect or infect. All of these moments that are happening along the way of I Am One, though it started before all that with Susan, she taps into this. She taps into the fact that we are one person who can make a change, right? When those seeds were being planted in Susan, there was a lot of protests and marching, which there is now too, but it was different. It was different marching and protests then. And it was all these children were coming to light for climate change. And there was all these things happening in the world. And what she does so well is she manages to take what's happening in the world and bring it in and then bring it back out in a way for children that is this larger umbrella idea that you are a person who can make change. It's very simple, right? You can affect the world, making them believe that they truly, truly can. Having a book that tells them this is true. But yet the way that we are making change has changed dramatically through the making of this book. And so what was on our minds in the moment of the art is actually what's on our minds in this moment right now. But we had to be really sensitive about that wall and what that meant for the context of this book, literally and metaphorically, and then how to show that.
So yeah, that segues into what I was going to ask. So Susan, especially with the I Am One book, you do go into some serious issues. How do you condense that for a younger audience? How do you make it digestible for them?
I mean, I guess I think about, well, I have my own children. I was an elementary school teacher for many years. And, when you're raising your kids, when you're working with kids, when you're considering kids, or around them, you are always getting, they pick up on at least the energy of what's going on in the world. And often what they imagine in their own heads is far more stressful or challenging or upsetting than what's really happening or what they're able to verbalize. And sometimes it can make them feel helpless or like just things are coming at them or happening to them. And I guess I think about all the questions I was asked and still get asked and how potentially unprepared I was to answer them, but how would I explain? I know kids are so smart. And like I said, they're just absorbing it all. So all the adults around them are, freaking out or full of anxiety or talking about what's going on. And they get these little bits and pieces. And I sort of always want them to have a sense that, they are a part of things. They have some agency, some ownership, some ability to participate, to express themselves, to take care of themselves. And so I guess I just think about the bigger picture. What are the big things that are going on in their lives that maybe they don't totally understand? And then just using language that they can relate to kind of help them cope, help them find the tools within themselves. So I mean, it's just, I guess, playing with the language, remembering what it was like to be a child and what I wish someone had said to me in some of these circumstances. And then, not ever talking down to, but really just empowering and connecting them to the bigger picture in a way that's not frightening, that's more empowering and self-care focused. Hopefully that answered some of your questions.
Definitely. No, that definitely answered the question. Erica, do picture books with a point do better than picture books that are kind of just there for entertainment value?
Well, even if it's there for entertainment value, that is still a point.
True.
I do work with some writers who are fiercely vigilant about, keeping to the entertainment value of a text just for the entertainment value, the fun for the fun of it. It's a lot harder today. It's just a harder sell. I was recently talking with an author, not one of my clients, who is a best-selling author, very well known, who notoriously has done picture books that are sort of like the clever joke, has also done picture books that are sort of the moment. And he was saying that what he could sell in 2015 and 16, maybe even 17, he could not sell today. And so there's only so much room on the bookshelves in the bookstores. And especially right now, people's time is so limited. So if they're going to get behind something, right, because their child is next to them, they're trying to figure out what they're going to do next month, where they're going to be, how they're going to, be living. It's like we were always fighting for editors and art directors' attentions, always. But now, we're really, really fighting. So what is going to make somebody sit up and take notice and say, this is the book? This is the book. And so I would argue, and I have in many query letters lately, that like my own query letters, you query us, I query them, and then they query sales. It just keeps going. We're all just selling all the time. That we need a good laugh. We need to be taken out of the moment. But it has to be really, really great wordplay. It has to be, it's like, yes, can it be funny, but can a teacher also use it to talk about puns or idioms or, where it's layers. So this industry is all about layers, right? It's like, can it hook into a season? Is a grandparent going to buy it? Can a teacher teach something off of it? So yes, it could be for the fun of it, but can it also have some of those other layers so that the publishers can feel like they have a real opportunity to sell it in and to have a reason to talk about something?
So, Susan, when you're starting to write a book, do you focus on theme first? Is that one of the first things that triggers you to write a book about something, or does it start with the character? Where do your ideas usually begin?
My ideas typically begin, either with a theme or an experience. I'm not sitting around saying what's happening in the world right now and what should I be writing about. I'm really thinking about what moves me, what I see moves kids, and what experiences have shaped my life that might shape someone else's life. Those are the kinds of things that I consider. But the story comes from, again, an experience or, an overall kind of theme or a tool or something that I really want to share. I'm doing this Fractured Fairy Tale series. We've had the first of 3 come out already. And that was The Three Little Yogis and the Wolf Who Lost His Breath. And that was characters, that was narrative, and that's something I am still learning to do. So that was already set up for me. But mostly my stories, again, are experiences, themes, that's what drives me versus a character.
And you have to know what you do well. Oh,
No,
I
I'm
wish
not funny. I might be funny in person, hopefully, maybe, but not so much in my storytelling. You know,
yeah, you have to be honest with yourself about who you are and what you do well. And usually sort of what you love and what's driving you and your real voice, the real you when you're with your friends or when you're with your kids or when you're with your students, or the real you that cracks yourself up, you know, or when you feel like, oh, that was a really good thought. That was the one. Like you have to tap into that rather than try to tap into the marketplace or try to tap into somebody else's.
also, is if you're thinking about, you know, okay, look, what is happening in this moment? I should be, you know, writing a book about this because this is happening. Well, by the time your book comes out, the world, as we know, will most likely have shifted again. And so what might have been sort of the moment while you're writing, a year, 2 years later, may not be, or, you know, a million other books might have come out with that, you know. So it's, for me personally anyway, I don't get stuck, or I try not to, or I don't want to get stuck in like, what is happening right in this moment that needs addressing right now, because that'll change. And it's really, what are these sort of universal things that we feel, experience, whatever, that have been, will carry on, you know, that are more kind of inclusive of everyone as we go forward.
So I want to revisit the quote that I used at the top of the show about picture books being the first art a child sees. Susan, that sounds like a lot of pressure. Is that the way you see it? Do you kind of embrace that?
I mean, is it the first art a child sees?
According to Tommy DePaulo, it is. I
I mean, I think it maybe is a very one of the first, and a very powerful one. I mean, I would, you know, there are board books, there are other potentially experiences with, you know, depending on your circumstance or your exposure or things like that. I do think, though, that it is a very powerful medium. It is very powerful because it might be the first art that a child sees that they actually begin to understand, connect with, see bits of themselves in, you know, learn about humor, empathy, all the feelings that they feel, learning how to put words to those feelings, seeing the visual art and understanding stories beyond the text, you know, making connections and inferences and all of that. So, I mean, it's certainly a powerful form of art, and one of the earliest. Although I certainly would never go against anything Tommy DePaulo said. I mean, come on, really. So yes, I agree with him. But yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's an important point of connection and exposure. So, I mean, it is a powerful work of art that is seen so early in a child's development.
So I want to change subjects here a bit. So Erica, when you see a query for a picture book, do you have an artistic vision in mind already? Do you have to think of, oh, I have a good artist in mind to do this, or can you just pick it up based on text alone?
I think I basically do it on text alone. And I think every agent is going to be different this way. I am partial to the read aloud experience of it. And so that's very compelling for me. I'm also partial to like thematically what I think is important, like in the moment, like what I'm looking for, or what I hear editors are looking for as well, like having sort of an awareness of holes in people's lists and where I think I might be able to place something. I am not, as much as I want to be, I am not the best at matching authors and artists. I wish I was. And I love being part of the process so I can learn from amazing art directors. And I have friends who are agents who are incredible packagers. That is what they do. That is not, I don't know is see that. So I have clients who are really good at it too, much better than I am. So no, I'm not looking visually. I'm looking for where, if it might have a place in the marketplace, in my opinion, if it should have a place in the marketplace, if I think I can sell it to a particular, if anybody comes to mind, if it has read aloud potential, those are, and I'm looking at this author, I'm sort of looking beyond just the text to the person. Who is this person? What is important to this person? How does this person work? What other texts do they have? It's not easy. I know a lot of agents say they need to see at least 3 texts that are in good shape in order to take on a picture book author that they feel like they can sell. And I never said that before. I sort of fall in love with something and I'm like, whatever, I'm taking it, I'm going to sell it. But I understand it because there is an expectation from authors that you will build a career for them. And that can be very slow if you come with one text ready to go. It can take a long time to nail a second text. Now, not for everybody, but it can. And I find, authors of picture book, you can write a lot really fast. And it takes I'm not saying not everybody can write a lot really fast, really, really well, but the vast majority cannot. It takes a commitment, and you kind of have to slow your roll to work on one piece to get it to be really fantastic. And I can see why an agent might want authors to have done that work, to have 3 of those, because then they can more easily fulfill the author's expectation that once you sell that first, or once you take them on, their career is going to start going. If you have not done that work, then you're going to be doing that work, while you're with your agent, and it can take real time.
So,
did I answer the question? I can't remember.
No,
okay.
You did, and you answered another important question, which I was even going to ask, which was this 3 picture book thing. I didn't know that, so that's very helpful to know. Susan, this question's inspired by your book, The Museum. When you see an artistic style, do you ever kind of write a story based on that? Just sort of thinking in terms of what the story to that picture could be. I'm always curious to hear from the writer's mind what happens when this idea comes around.
Do I think of it? So
have you ever seen an artistic style and thought, I could write a story that fits that style?
I mean, I guess in a way, when I wrote Hey Wall and it was focused on street art, and I sort of felt like the poetry and the movement and the repetition in the text felt like that kind of art, that kind of movement, expression, mural making, even graffiti, if we're going to go that far, because that was something I'd had an experience with growing up, and that was, the inspiration for the story. I mean, certainly when I wrote Rock and Roll Soul, the text, I felt it had a musical quality to it, so it was kind of, my writing, I was writing in a way that felt connected to music in some way. For the museum, that one was really incorporating so many different styles of art that to me, that was more writing in a way that felt very, it felt like there was movement and there was exploration. So I do think about that a little, sort of the rhythm of the text with regard to whatever the focus is. I guess that the one that stood out to me would be Hey Wall, that sort of street art graffiti. And I thought specifically I could write a story about that.
But this is a common, this happens a lot, actually. For example, Matthew Burgess, who's the author most recently of Drawing on Walls, the picture book about Keith Haring, which if you have not checked it out, it's incredible, and you should. Drawing on Walls by Matthew Burgess, especially if those of you in the audience are writing nonfiction. He Shahrazad, whose last name is escaping me, is an illustrator, and her agent came to us with an image that she had drawn, and was wondering if Matthew would write a story around that character. And interestingly enough, I had had lunch with Matthew just a few weeks earlier, and Matthew is a poet and an educator, and when you're with a poet and an educator, you cannot help but bare your soul. And so I had been talking about one of my sons and challenges he was having on the playground. And so we were really talking about, how do you find your people? How do you stay true to who you are in that process as a child? And then here came in this drawing of this boy surrounded by birds. And Matthew took sort of this drawing by Shahrazad and this conversation we had and his own life experiences, and I'm sure many other influences as well. But what came out of that is this book called Bird Boy, which is publishing next spring in 21, about a boy who's new to a school and could make the choice to try to fit in when he very clearly from the very beginning does not, but instead sort of owns the fact that he is having these relationships with these birds at recess rather than the other kids. And eventually other kids, find their interest in him for who he truly is, and he attracts the right kids to him. And so that process of agents bringing art to writers is something that happens a lot. It's something that happens on the publisher side too, where a publisher has an artist who they work with or has an artist who they want to work with, and they might say, for example, has Matthew seen so-and-so's art? Might there be something in his portfolio that interests Matthew, that might inspire him to write a text? This is also a great exercise if you're trying to find a way into a story and you're feeling blocked. Go to your favorite artists' websites, go into their portfolio, take one of their pieces and use it as a launch pad for writing. And it might help you to really hone in on character, especially today when we're also focused on issues and wanting to give back through our art. A lot of what I'm seeing is thematically heavy-handed and didactic, and the character is lost. Now that can work, I'm not saying it can't. Look at the I Am series, right? I mean, it's brilliant for its themes, but the majority of picture books that work and that get acquired are character-based, and the publishers are looking for a unique character. You can look at Aram Kim. If you don't know her work, it's Aram Kim, and she has these picture books about Yumi, who's a Korean cat, a Korean cat child. And the first book was No Kimchi for Me. Now there's 3 books, and she's working on her 4th, all about Yumi. And now they're even branding the books, Holiday House is the publisher, Yumi Friends and Family. So each book has a blast on it, like a sticker blast, where it is tying them together as a series visually, which is going to be great in the retail market. And the reason it worked is because Yumi was a rich character. No kimchi for me, right? She was afraid of eating the kimchi because it was spicy, and her big brothers made fun of her because she wouldn't eat the kimchi. And then the next one was let's go to Taekwondo, right? And now Yumi is like going to Taekwondo, and she can't break the board, and she's scared of breaking the board, which came out of us brainstorming. Aram grew up in Korea and she moved here, and so she's Korean, and we're looking at her own personal culture, and we're looking at what's important to her and her world. And then we were looking at, okay, what else can happen to Yumi? And I'm like, oh, so many kids, they take Taekwondo in my neighborhood. Like, kids take Taekwondo in all New York City neighborhoods. It's like a big thing in New York City, and it's a big thing culturally for Korea, and so Aram started taking Taekwondo. She started going to Taekwondo classes, herself, so she could understand where there might be conflict in that setting. What was true for her. And now the next one is Sunday Fun Day in Koreatown. And so I urge you to explore character because publishers really want that from you.
So this is going to segue into the last question. I want people to know in the Q&A, Erica has been excellent with answering people's questions
yes, I'm
already.
trying.
We're going to get to more. We're going to get to more of those questions here in a second, but I just want to end my questioning with recommendations. Erica, you just gave us a whole bunch, so I'll give you a break and go to Susan for recommendations first, but then if you had any more you didn't get in, we'll come back to you. So Susan.
Well, for my book recommendations?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, all right. So here's my, it's a tough one because there are so many good ones and there's great ones coming out constantly, consistently. I mean, and Erica's already mentioned a couple. But what I would do if you're really looking for good book recommendations is to actually go follow the educators out there who are compiling these incredible lists and are constantly updating them and breaking them down into what categories they represent. And so if you're, I mean, obviously go into your local or not go in, you can't go in now, but go online to your indie bookstores to support them and see what's new and talk to the owners or the book buyers or book and booksellers and see what's new. But I would follow people like the Tutu Teacher on Instagram, or Here We Read, or John Shu, who's a librarian. So Mr. Shu Reads. And I would go and look for the educators who are really recommending incredible books that are out now, coming out soon, and again, that are sort of broken down into these various categories of whatever you're looking for in terms of representation, in terms of humor, in terms of powerful messages. So that would actually be my recommendation to get the best book recommendations.
And I do have so many recommendations, and I'm so sad that I'm not home because I would normally never do this call without actually picking up hundreds of thousands of books to show you guys. It's very frustrating to me that I don't have my bookshelf with me. But like, for example, if you're looking to write nonfiction and you're thinking about concepts, and I think I saw that maybe in one of the questions, Joyce Hesselberth. I don't know how to like chat without answering a question to write these names in here for you, but Joyce Hesselberth, it's Hesselberth. Her first book was Mapping Sam with Green Willow, and it actually won the Bologna Ragazzi honor as one of the best nonfiction books in the world for the year it came out. She does a brilliant job of mashing narrative, what do they call it, like fictional informational books. It's sort of like narrative nonfiction fiction. Her second one was Pitter Pattern, and the one that's coming next is Beatrice in a Tree. So the first one, Mapping Sam, follows a cat. Where does the cat go at night? Let's map it. So we map where the cat goes. We map the flower that the cat smells. We map the pond that he puts his paw in. We look at the blueprint of the building that it wanders into. And then it gets a little bit more like, can we map her dreams? It's really beautiful. Pitter Pattern is about patterns. But in terms, if you're looking to do concepts, publishers are looking for new, fresh concepts, and they're looking for a way to make it narrative. So you might also look at Two Dogs on a Trike by Gabby Snyder, who's not my client, but it is illustrated by Robin Rosenthal, who is. And it is a brilliant example of how to do a counting book. How do you do another counting book? Look at that book for an example. It's really funny about this cat who's following these dogs who are going from transportation vehicle to transportation vehicle. Cumulative, one dog on the trike, two dogs on the trike, and they don't know the cat is following. The cat wants in on that counting, and the cat eventually shows up. Now, it's a great example too of how Robin, a brilliant illustrator, was able to add humor with her art to really elevate the humor that was already in the text. Another one is Christy Hale, Waterland. It is so cool about water and landforms and how she's an author illustrator, and so author illustrators are able to play with ideas in ways that sometimes it's hard for an author alone. If you're a poet, and I saw that there was a question about why rhyming is so hard. I have now tried to go out with 2 rhyming picture books in the last month, and I am not having success. They're good, but they're not brilliant rhymes. But they're good. I think one of them is by a brilliant lyricist. Like for him, the rhyme, for him, the rhyme is brilliant, but the story is familiar. For the other, the rhyme is not brilliant, but the story and the concept, I think, is brilliant. And it's not working. And I'm like, editors, can't you just fix the other? But they're not going to. And so I want you to realize that that's the reality of today, is that unless you are truly a lyricist, don't use rhyme as a way in. And I know sometimes for a lot of people it is. If you need that for your very first draft, go for it. But then sit back and try to write it without the rhyme and just free yourself of the rhyme, and try to find your voice without relying on that rhyme to feel like it's satisfying.
So one last question before we wrap up today. Just if you could give one piece of advice to aspiring picture book writers, what would it be? Susan, we'll start with you.
What would it be? It would be to write what moves you, right? Write with your own voice, with your own heart, from your own place. Not, it's great to read lots of picture books and have lots of reference points and information, and to see what's out there and what's happening and different styles and different concepts and all of that. But when it comes down to it, it's you who's telling the story. So it's got to be really authentic to you. And so sticking to or finding or working on your voice and the things that are important to you will make the most authentic story, and you're selling yourself, and you can stand behind and by that. So just stick to what feels good and what is true to you. That would be my advice.
Very good. Erica, your advice?
Well, you're already in a part of a class program, so that's one big one, is to keep seeking out critique groups, keep seeking out writing classes. It's really a process. It can take years for the first one, and then it can take years for the second one. Kate Messner, I think, has this brilliant piece on her website about, it's something like, out of the 100 ideas she has for a picture book, she writes them all down. Out of that 100, maybe she tries to write 50. Out of that 50, maybe she does a second draft of 20. Out of that 20, maybe she keeps working on 10. Out of that 10, maybe she works, and I'm totally botching, this is not what she said, but she said something like this. And I think it was Kate, and maybe it wasn't. Out of those 10, maybe she brings 5 to critique group. Out of that 5, maybe she has 1 that she brings to her agent. It's like, so, or that she brings to a submission to an agent. For her, it's to her agent. But that is the work that is truly happening here. With authors who are making it.
Well, thank you both so much for being here. You've been wonderful and enlightening. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
Josh.
thank you so much for having us, and good luck, everybody.
I'm happy to come back anytime with a show and tell once I'm back home.
Perfect.
Thanks, everybody. Good luck.
Bye.
All right, so for everybody who wants to get involved, we have our Twitter pitch party, which if you have a picture book of your own that you want to pitch, you can get on Twitter between now and Friday at midnight and pitch your picture book. I will take as many pitches as I can and send them on to Erica for feedback. Just they're on the Gotham Writers Inside Writing page, there is a best practices for how to participate in this. First off, you want to make sure you include hashtag PITGOTHAM, Pit Gotham, in your tweet. Otherwise, I won't be able to find it. You don't have to tag us or tag anyone. You just have to include that hashtag and I'll be able to find it. Otherwise, make sure you also condense your entire book pitch into a single tweet. Multiple tweet pitches are not allowed. But if you have more than one project to pitch, by all means, pitch as many as you want. Just make sure you do separate tweets. Also, a good comparable title or two is a good idea. And again, you can look at these guidelines on the site, but make sure you include hashtag PITGOTHAM. Also, as I mentioned at the top of the show, the Gotham Writers Conference, one of the big things we added this year was our own picture book table, where you can sit down. Obviously, it's not going to be at a table. It's going to be in a Zoom room since we're doing this all digitally. But you'll be at a table with two agents in the field of picture book writing, one of which is Erica, who you all met today. If you have a project that you want feedback and advice on moving forward with, this is the place to be. Registration's open. This is also on the Gotham Writers website. Lastly, next week is our query letter evaluation show, which is a special episode of Inside Writing where we'll be joined by two agents, and we'll just go through a bunch of query letters that you provide, and we will talk about what works, what doesn't, what could be better. So if you have a query that you want considered to be included on the show, send it to josh@gothamwriters.com. That's me. We have quite a bit already, but I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. So if you want to send your query in for feedback from two agents, send it to josh@gothamwriters.com. So that's what's next week inside Query Letter Writing, and we will see you then. Thank you all for being here.